The small room smelled of medicine and fear. Dim lights cast long shadows across the walls of the HFY Rehabilitation Center. Commander Vexthal sat in his metal chair, his 4 yellow eyes staring at the floor. His left arm was gone, replaced by a simple robotic limb that clicked when he moved. Scars covered the gray skin of his face like spider webs. Across from him, a young Zephyrian journalist named Kellanara set up her recording device. She had traveled 3 star systems to get this interview. Most war veterans refused to talk about the humans. They would shake their heads and walk away when asked. Some would start crying. Others would become angry and violent. Vexthal was different. He had agreed to speak, though his hands shook as he waited for the questions to begin. "Commander, thank you for meeting with me today," Kellanara said in a soft voice. She kept her distance, having been warned that veterans could become unpredictable when discussing the war. Vexthal's mechanical hand made a small whirring sound as he lifted it. "Just call me Vexthal now. I am not a commander anymore. I am not anything anymore." The journalist nodded and checked her recording device. Red lights showed it was working. "Can you tell me about your service before the war with the humans?" For the first time, Vexthal looked up. His eyes held a tired expression that seemed much older than his 40 cycles of age. "I served the Empire for 20 years. I commanded ships in 7 different campaigns. We conquered the Rillan system. We brought the Thoric species under Imperial rule. I was decorated 15 times for bravery and tactical excellence." He paused and looked at his robotic hand. "I thought I understood war. I thought I knew what it meant to fight." Kellanara leaned forward slightly. "What changed your mind?" "The humans changed everything," Vexthal said. His voice became quieter. "Everything we knew about warfare, about conquest, about how species behave when faced with superior force. The humans made all of our knowledge worthless." The room fell, silent except for the quiet hum of the medical equipment in the walls. Vexthal stared at something Kellanara could not see. "Tell me about the beginning," she said. "When did you first encounter human forces?" Vexthal closed his eyes. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. I remember the exact moment because it was the last time I felt confident about anything." He began to speak in the measured tone of someone who had told this story to many doctors and therapists. "High Command had been planning the human conquest for 2 full cycles. Our intelligence ships had been watching their world for years. The reports all said the same thing: primitive technology, divided governments, no unified military command. A young species that had barely left their home planet." Kellanara made notes on her electronic pad. "What was the Empire's assessment of human military capability?" "Minimal," Vexthal said with a bitter laugh. "They had chemical rockets and basic energy weapons. Their largest ships were smaller than our scout vessels. They had something called nuclear weapons, but these were crude devices that would be useless against our shields. The intelligence reports estimated the conquest would take 1 solar rotation at most." He stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the rehabilitation center's gardens. Other veterans moved slowly along the paths, some missing limbs, others staring at nothing with empty eyes. "I commanded the dreadnought Sharvik," he continued. "Crew of 2,000. The finest warriors in the Empire. We had conquered 17 star systems. My ship alone had destroyed over 300 enemy vessels in previous campaigns." "You felt confident about the mission?" Vexthal turned back to face her. "Confident." We were laughing. "My officers were making jokes about how quickly we would finish this assignment. Some were already planning how to spend their conquest bonuses. We thought the humans would surrender as soon as they saw our fleet." He sat back down, his mechanical hand making small clicking sounds as he adjusted his position. The Zephyrian Empire had never encountered a species that continued fighting after their initial defeat. Every civilization we had ever met followed the same pattern. We would arrive with overwhelming force. They would fight briefly. They would realize they could not win. They would surrender and accept imperial rule. Kellanara looked up from her notes. "But the humans were different?" Different is not the right word, Vexthel said. His voice became strained. The humans were impossible. They broke every rule we knew about how intelligent beings behave. He began to describe the journey to the human system. The Zephyrian fleet consisted of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, and over 200 smaller ships. It was the largest invasion force the Empire had ever assembled, though High Command insisted it was probably more than necessary. We spent the journey studying human military history, Vexthel said. This was standard procedure. Know your enemy's tactics and psychology? The reports showed that humans fought among themselves constantly. Their planet was divided into nearly 200 separate political units. They had been at war with each other for thousands of their years. Did this intelligence help you prepare? Vexthel shook his head. It made us more confident. We thought a species that could not unite against internal enemies would be even easier to defeat. How could they coordinate a defense against us when they could not stop fighting each other? The mechanical hand clicked again as he gestured. We also studied their individual conflicts. Humans seemed to follow predictable patterns. They would fight until their casualties reached a certain level, then seek negotiation. They valued the lives of their soldiers and civilians. They had rules about warfare that limited their effectiveness. They seemed incapable of making the hard choices necessary for victory. Killanara made more notes. When did you first realize these assumptions might be wrong? The moment we entered their system, Vexthel said immediately. Our sensors detected human ships moving to intercept us near the orbit of their largest gas giant. Intelligence had told us their entire fleet consisted of maybe 50 vessels. We detected over 200 approaching our position. He paused and looked at his hands, but that was not the strange part. The strange part was how they moved. Human ships did not follow any formation we recognized. They seemed to be scattered randomly through space. Some were hiding behind the gas giant's moons. Others were positioned near asteroid fields. A few appeared to be drifting without power. What did your tactical officers think of this formation? They thought the humans were either incompetent or insane, Vexthel said. Admiral Thekvar ordered us to engage what appeared to be their command vessel. It was larger than the others and positioned at the center of their formation. Standard Imperial doctrine called for destroying the enemy command structure first. He stood up again and began pacing the small room. We advanced in proper Imperial formation. Dreadnoughts in the center, cruisers on the flanks, fighters providing screening. Our weapons were charged and ready. Our shields were at maximum strength. We expected to destroy the human fleet within minutes. What happened next? Vexthel stopped pacing and looked directly at Killanara. The humans did something no enemy had ever done before. They did not retreat when faced with superior force. They did not attempt to negotiate. They did not surrender. His voice became quieter. Instead, they attacked us. The room fell silent again. Killanara waited for him to continue, sensing that this moment was crucial to understanding what had changed him. But it was not just that they attacked, Vexthel said finally. It was how they attacked. Their tactics made no sense according to everything we knew about warfare, and yet they worked. Somehow, impossibly, they worked. He returned to his chair and sat down heavily. That was my first lesson about humans. They do not follow the rules that govern other species. They create their own rules, and those rules are designed for only one purpose, which is winning. Vexthel said, no matter the cost, no matter how impossible it seems, no matter what they have to sacrifice. Humans fight to win, and they will do anything to achieve that goal. The recording device continued to hum quietly as both beings sat. In silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the implications of those words. Vexthel stared at the wall for several long moments before continuing his story. His mechanical hand moved slowly across the surface of the table, making small scratching sounds against the metal. The human commander was named Jake Morrison. He said, I learned his name later from intercepted communications. He commanded a ship called the UES Defiance. According to our intelligence, it was one of their most advanced vessels, but compared to the Sharvek, it was like comparing a child's toy to a real weapon. Kilanara adjusted her recording device and waited for him to continue. Morrison's ship was half the size of our smallest cruiser, Vexthal said. Its armor was primitive metal alloys. Its weapons were basic energy cannons that should not have been able to damage our shields. By every measure we understood, destroying it should have taken less than a minute. He paused and looked at his robotic hand. The first strange thing was that Morrison did not try to run. When our fleet approached, his ships moved closer to us, not away. This violated every basic principle of military strategy. You do not charge at a superior enemy force. The journalist made notes while listening. What did your commanders think of this tactic? Admiral Vekvar laughed, Vexthal said. He ordered all ships to record the battle for later study at the Imperial War College. He wanted to show future officers an example of how primitive species commit suicide through poor tactics. Vexthal stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, 2 other veterans were sitting on a bench, neither speaking to the other. We targeted Morrison's ship first, he continued. Standard procedure. Destroy the command vessel and the rest will surrender or flee. I gave the order to fire primary weapons. 6 antimatter beams struck the Defiance directly. Did you destroy it? No, Vexthal said quietly. The ship was damaged, but it kept fighting. This was our first surprise. Human ships were somehow more durable than our intelligence reports indicated, but that was not the real problem. He turned back to face Kilanara. The real problem was what happened next. The moment we fired on Morrison's ship, every other human vessel in the area suddenly changed their behavior. Ships that had been drifting powered up their engines. Ships hiding behind moons came out of cover. Ships that seemed scattered across empty space suddenly formed coordinated attack groups. They had been pretending to be disorganized? Yes, but it was more than that, Vexthal said. They had positioned themselves perfectly to trap us. While we focused on what we thought was their main fleet, other human ships had moved into positions around us. We did not see them because they were using the gas giant's magnetic field to hide their energy signatures. He began pacing again, his movements quick and nervous. Within seconds of our first attack, we were surrounded. Human ships came at us from 6 different directions. They moved in ways that made no sense. Some attacked in straight lines. Others spiraled around our formation. A few seemed to be flying. Completely random patterns. Were they trying to confuse your targeting systems? That was what we thought at first, Vexthal said, but then we realized the truth. Each group of human ships was attacking with different tactics. They were testing our defenses. Every time we adapted to one attack pattern, another group would try something completely different. He stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. Morrison was using his entire fleet as a learning tool. He was willing to sacrifice ships and crews to gather information about how we fought. Kilanara looked up from her notes. That seems like a desperate strategy. Desperate and brilliant, Vexthal agreed. Because while we were destroying some of his ships, the others were learning. Human pilots who survived the first attacks shared their knowledge with the rest of the fleet. Within minutes, they knew the range of our weapons, the speed of our targeting systems, and the blind spots in our formation. The mechanical hand clicked as he gestured. Then Morrison did something that still gives me nightmares. He ordered his damaged ships to ram our vessels. They used their ships as weapons, not just as weapons, Vexthal said, as guided missiles. I watched a human fighter pilot named Amy Chun fly her burning ship directly into our forward weapons. Array, her ship was already destroyed, she was probably dying. But she used her final moments to damage us. He sat down heavily in his chair. This was completely outside our understanding of how intelligent beings behave. You do not sacrifice yourself unless there is no other choice. You certainly do not sacrifice yourself just to damage an enemy weapon system. But the humans did? Over and over again, Vexthal said. During that first battle, 7 human ships rammed our vessels. 7 pilots chose to die rather than retreat. Each attack was precisely aimed to cause maximum damage to critical systems. He looked at the recording device as if seeing it for the first time. Hune's attack destroyed our primary targeting computer. Another human pilot, someone named Rodriguez, crashed into our communication array. A third pilot hit our shield generator controls. They were targeting specific systems? Yes, and that was impossible, Vexthal said. Our ship designs were classified Imperial secrets. No human should have known where our critical systems were located. But somehow they targeted exactly the right places. He rubbed his face with his good hand. Later, we learned that Morrison had been studying recordings of our previous battles. Humans had been watching us fight other species for years. They analyzed how our ships moved, where we placed our weapons, how we responded to different threats. They had been preparing for war with you? Preparing for war with someone, Vexthal said. Human military doctrines seemed designed around fighting enemies with superior technology. All of their tactics assumed they would be outnumbered and outgunned. He stood up and began walking around the small room. While the ramming attacks were happening, Morrison's remaining ships continued their coordinated assault. But now they were using what they had learned. Human fighters flew in patterns that kept them just outside our weapon range. Their larger ships concentrated fire on the systems that had been damaged by the ramming attacks. How long did the battle last? 3 hours, Vexthal said. 3 hours of the most confusing combat I had ever experienced. Every time we thought we understood what the humans were doing, they changed tactics again. He stopped by the window and looked out at the gardens. The worst part was Morrison himself. Throughout the entire battle, he maintained constant communication with every ship in his fleet. Our codebreakers tried to jam their signals, but human encryption was unlike anything we had seen. They had advanced communication technology? Not advanced, Vexthal said. Clever. They used multiple layers of simple codes that changed constantly. Instead of one complex system that could be broken, they had hundreds of simple systems that worked together. He turned back to Killanara. Morrison coordinated his entire fleet like it was a single organism. Ships that were light years apart responded to his orders within seconds. Damaged vessels shared targeting data with healthy ones. Pilots who discovered weaknesses in our defenses immediately transmitted that information to everyone else. What was the outcome of the battle? Vexthal's expression became grim. We won, technically. The human fleet retreated after losing 43 ships, but we lost 3 vessels, including a heavy cruiser. Our casualties were over 800 dead and 2,000 wounded. He sat back down and stared at his hands. More importantly, we learned that every assumption we had made about humans was wrong. They did not surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They did not fight in predictable patterns. They were willing to sacrifice individual ships and lives for tactical advantage. How did your superiors react to this report? Admiral Vekvar accused me of cowardice, Vexthal said. He said I had been intimidated by primitive tactics and exaggerated the human threat. High Command ordered the fleet to continue with the invasion as planned. He looked directly at the journalist. But I knew something had changed. I had been fighting for 20 years, and I had never encountered an enemy like Morrison and his pilots. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Did you try to warn anyone? I sent detailed reports to Imperial Intelligence, Vexthal said. I recommended that we study human tactics more carefully before proceeding with the invasion. I suggested that we might need to revise our strategy. He laughed bitterly. My reports were filed away and ignored. High Command was convinced that our victory proved human weakness. They said losing 43 ships to destroy only 3 was evidence of poor human tactics. But you disagreed? I knew they were wrong, Vexthal said. Morrison had not been trying to win that battle. He had been trying to learn. And he had succeeded. By the time his fleet retreated, they knew exactly how to fight us. The room fell quiet except for the soft humming of medical equipment in the walls. Vexthal stared at something beyond the window that Killanara could not see. That was our first mistake, he said finally. We thought we had won a victory. Morrison knew he had won something much more valuable. He had won knowledge. And humans, I learned, are very good at using knowledge to kill their enemies. Killanara noticed that Vexthal's breathing had become faster as he talked about the first battle. His mechanical hand was moving constantly now, tapping against the table in a nervous rhythm. "Would you like to take a break?" she asked. "No," Vexthal said quickly. "If I stop now, I might not be able to continue. The next part is the hardest to talk about." He stood up and walked to the far corner of the room, as if trying to put distance between himself and the memories he was about to share. "After the battle near Jupiter, High Command decided to change strategy," he said. "Instead of attacking Earth directly, we would capture their military coordination center first. Our intelligence had identified a facility on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, called New Geneva. What made this facility important? According to our spy satellites, it was where human military leaders planned their defense strategies," Vexthal said. "We believe that capturing it would cut off communication between human forces and make them easier to defeat." He began pacing again, his movements more agitated than before. "I was promoted to ground commander and given 50,000 troops for the assault. The facility was defended by only 8,000 humans. The battle should have been over in days." But it was not? "The siege lasted 3 months, Vexthal sighed. 3 months of the most brutal fighting I have ever experienced. And by the end, I understood that we had made another terrible mistake about humans." He stopped pacing and looked directly at Killanara. "We thought we were fighting soldiers. We were actually fighting something much more dangerous." The journalist waited for him to explain. "The human commanders were Colonel Lisa Parker and Major Ben Carter," Vexthal continued. "Parker was a small woman, barely half the size of our smallest warrior. Carter was older, with gray hair and a calm voice. When we first saw them through our surveillance equipment, my officers laughed. These humans looked like civilians, not military leaders. What changed your opinion?" "The way they used Europa's environment against us," Vexthal said. "The moon has low gravity and a complex system of underground tunnels that humans had built for mining operations. Parker and Carter turned the entire moon into a weapon." He sat back down but continued moving restlessly in his chair. "Instead of defending fixed positions like normal military forces, the humans moved constantly through those tunnels. Our troops would secure an area, and the humans would appear behind us through passages we did not know existed. They knew the terrain better than you did." "They did not just know it," Vexthal said. "They had modified it. During the first week of fighting, we discovered that humans had been preparing for our invasion for months. They had dug new tunnels, placed hidden weapons caches, and created escape routes throughout the facility." He rubbed his forehead with his good hand. "Every time we thought we had them trapped, they would vanish. Our troops would enter a room full of human defenders, and by the time we secured it, the humans would be attacking our supply lines from a completely different direction. How did they coordinate these movements?" "That was what frustrated us most," Vexthal said. "We could not intercept their communications because they were not using radio signals. Instead, they had created a network of physical message runners who moved through the tunnel system. Our electronic surveillance was useless against humans carrying written orders." He stood up again and walked to the window. "But the real problem was not their tactics, it was their attitude. These humans fought like they had already accepted death." "What do you mean?" "I mean they showed no fear," Vexthal said. "When Zephyrian soldiers are surrounded and outnumbered, they surrender. It is logical behavior that preserves life for future battles. But humans in impossible situations just fought harder." He turned back to face her. "I want to tell you about Sergeant Nick Rodriguez." He was one of Parker's squad leaders, responsible for defending a choke point that controlled access to 3 major tunnel systems. "What happened to him?" "My forces attacked his position with 200 soldiers," Vexthal said. "Rodriguez had 12 men with him. According to all military logic, they should have retreated or surrendered immediately." He began describing the battle in detail. Rodriguez and his squad had positioned themselves in a narrow tunnel intersection where the Zephyrian numerical advantage was reduced. They used improvised explosive devices made from mining equipment and damaged energy weapons that should not have worked, but somehow did. Rodriguez held that position for 6 hours, Vexthal said. 6 hours against overwhelming odds. His men fell one by one until he was fighting alone. We could see him through our surveillance cameras. He was wounded in multiple places. His weapon was damaged and barely functional, but he kept fighting. How did the battle end? Rodriguez used his final explosive device to collapse the tunnel, Vexthal said quietly. He buried himself and 20 of my soldiers under tons of rock rather than let us pass. When we finally cleared the debris, we found him still holding his weapon. The room fell silent for several moments. Killanara could see that this memory was particularly painful for the former commander. That was when I began to understand what we were really fighting, Vexthal continued. Rodriguez was not a professional soldier. According to the identification we found on his body, he had been a construction worker before the war. But he fought and died like the greatest warrior in the galaxy. Were there other incidents like this? Dozens, Vexthal said. Every day brought new examples of humans doing impossible things. They would hold positions that could not be defended. They would attack forces that vastly outnumbered them. They would sacrifice themselves to achieve objectives that seemed meaningless. He described other human defenders who had made similar stands. A medical officer named Dr. Susan Taylor who had refused to evacuate the facility's hospital, instead treating wounded soldiers from both sides while the battle raged around her. A communications specialist called Lieutenant Mark Williams who had maintained contact with Earth even while Zephyrian forces overran his position. The siege officially ended when we captured the main command center, Vexthal said. Colonel Parker and her remaining 200 soldiers had barricaded themselves in the facility's central bunker. We surrounded them with overwhelming force and demanded surrender. Did they surrender? Parker sent a single message, Vexthal said. She said her forces would continue fighting until every human was dead. But she offered to negotiate the evacuation of civilian personnel who were still in the facility. He sat down heavily. This was another example of human behavior that made no sense. Parker was willing to die rather than surrender, but she was also trying to save non-combatants. She could have used the civilians as hostages, but instead she wanted to protect them. What did you do? I agreed to let the civilians leave, Vexthal said. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. We would capture the military personnel and let the innocent people go free. He looked at his mechanical hand. But Parker had one final surprise for us. As soon as the civilians were safely away, she activated the facility's self-destruct system. The entire command center was destroyed in a matter of seconds. She killed herself rather than be captured? She killed herself to deny us our victory, Vexthal said. The explosion destroyed all of the facility's computers, communication equipment, and strategic databases. We had won the battle but gained nothing useful. He stood up and began pacing again. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what we discovered after the explosion. What did you discover? The real human command structure was not in New Geneva at all, Vexthal said. The facility was a decoy. While we spent 3 months fighting for an empty prize, the actual human military leadership was operating from dozens of hidden locations throughout their solar system. Killanara stopped taking notes and looked up at him. You mean the entire siege was pointless? Worse than pointless, Vexthal said. It was a trap. Parker and her soldiers knew they were defending a decoy facility. They fought and died to keep us busy while the real human commanders prepared their counterattack. He stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. 8,000 humans died in that siege, but their sacrifice bought time for millions of others to prepare. By the time we realized our mistake, human resistance networks were operating on every world we had occupied. How did this affect your forces? My soldiers were traumatized, Vexthal said. They had never encountered enemies who fought like the humans at New Geneva. The idea that beings would choose death over surrender was completely outside their experience. He looked directly at Killanara. Worse, they began to understand that every human they fought might be willing to make the same choice. How do you defeat an enemy who considers death preferable to defeat? Did you report these concerns to High Command? I tried, Vexthal said. But my superiors did not want to hear about human psychology. They only cared that we had captured the facility. The fact that it was worthless and had cost us 30,000 casualties was considered acceptable losses. He walked back to the window and stared out at the rehabilitation center's gardens. I knew we had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not just defending their territory. They were teaching us lessons about what they were capable of. Vexthal had been quiet for several minutes, staring at his mechanical hand as it moved slowly across the table surface. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. After New Geneva, High Command promoted me to Regional Pacification Commander, he said. I was given responsibility for maintaining order on 4 occupied human colonies. The Empire considered this a reward for my service. Killanara adjusted her recording device. How did you feel about this promotion? Terrified, Vexthal said immediately. I had seen what humans could do when defending a single facility. The idea of controlling entire worlds full of them seemed impossible. He stood up and began his familiar pacing pattern around the small room. But High Command insisted that occupation would be different from invasion. They said humans would accept Imperial rule once they understood resistance was futile. Did the humans accept Imperial rule? For exactly 6 days, Vexthal said with a bitter laugh. 6 days of peaceful occupation, then the resistance networks began operating. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the journalist. Have you ever heard of Kate Sullivan? Killanara shook her head. She was a schoolteacher on the colony world of New Boston before the war, Vexthal said. Small woman, quiet voice, spent her days teaching children basic mathematics. When we occupied her world, our intelligence classified her as a non-threat civilian. What changed? Sullivan became the leader of the most effective resistance cell in that sector, Vexthal said. Within 2 weeks of our arrival, supply convoys started disappearing. Communication arrays began failing. Zephyrian soldiers were found dead in their barracks with no sign of how the killer had entered or escaped. He resumed pacing, his movements becoming more agitated. At first, we thought these were random attacks by desperate survivors. Standard Imperial procedure was to increase security and wait for the resistance to exhaust itself. But that did not happen? The attacks became more sophisticated, Vexthal said. Sullivan's people had somehow learned to use our own technology against us. They took weapons from dead soldiers and modified them in ways our engineers said were impossible. He described finding Zephyrian energy rifles that had been converted into remote-controlled bombs. Human resistance fighters had figured out how to override the weapon safety systems and turn them into improvised explosive devices that could be triggered from a distance. A man named Danny Murphy led a similar group on the mining world of Kepler 442b, Vexthal continued. Murphy had been a mining engineer before the war. He used his knowledge of industrial equipment to create weapons that could destroy our vehicles and fortifications. How were they able to learn Zephyrian technology so quickly? That was what frightened us most, Vexthal said. Humans seemed to understand our equipment better than we did. A scientist named Dr. Ryan Foster somehow reverse-engineered our shield generators within 3 weeks of capturing one. He sat down heavily in his chair. Foster's modifications made our shields work better than the original Imperial design. When we found his workshop, we discovered that he had improved our technology by 30% efficiency. A human improved Zephyrian military technology? Not just improved it, Vexthal said. He had created versions that were specifically designed to fight against the original models. Foster gave his resistance cell weapons that could penetrate Imperial shields while being protected by better versions of those same shields. The mechanical hand clicked as he gestured, but the worst part was not their technology. It was their coordination. These resistance cells operated independently, but somehow they shared information across multiple star systems. How do they communicate without you detecting their signals? We never found out, Vexthal said. Our intelligence officers spent months trying to intercept resistance communications. They found nothing. No radio signals, no quantum transmissions, no coded messages through public networks. He rubbed his forehead with his good hand. Later, we realized that humans were using methods we had never considered. They passed information through seemingly innocent activities. A resistance fighter named Maria Santos worked as a food service worker in our main base. She was gathering intelligence about our operations and somehow transmitting it to other cells. How long did it take you to discover her activities? 8 months, Vexthal said. Santos had access to our command centers for 8 months. She knew our patrol schedules, our supply requirements, our troop strengths, and our strategic plans, all while serving meals to our officers. He stood up and walked to the window again. When we finally arrested her, we found that she had been using the food delivery system to carry messages. Coded information was hidden in the arrangement of items on serving trays. A resistance network was operating inside our most secure facilities, and we never suspected it. What was the psychological impact on your forces? Paranoia, Vexthal said immediately. My soldiers began to suspect every human civilian of being a resistance fighter. They were probably right. We later estimated that over 60% of the human population was involved in resistance activities in some way. He described the gradual breakdown of Zephyrian morale as the resistance networks demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible for a defeated species. Supply convoys required massive escorts to reach their destinations safely. Communication equipment failed so frequently that commanders could not coordinate their forces effectively. The humans also began psychological warfare that was unlike anything in our military manuals, Vexthal said. They targeted our cultural and religious sites with carefully planned attacks that were designed to demoralize rather than cause casualties. Can you give me an example? On Kepler 442b, resistance fighters led by a woman named Angela Davis broke into our main temple and rearranged all of the religious artifacts. Vexthal said, they did not steal anything or cause physical damage. Instead, they demonstrated that our most sacred spaces were not secure. He sat back down, his expression becoming more troubled. Davis left a message saying that humans respected Zephyrian religious beliefs and had handled all artifacts carefully. She apologized for the intrusion, but explained that it was necessary to show that nowhere was safe from human reach. How did your soldiers react to this? They were more frightened by the apology than they would have been by threats, Vexthal said. The idea that humans could penetrate our security and choose to show mercy was somehow more disturbing than if they had destroyed everything. He looked at his mechanical hand. This became a pattern. Resistance fighters would capture Zephyrian soldiers, provide medical treatment for their injuries, and then release them with messages for their commanders. What kind of messages? Offers of safe passage off human worlds for any Zephyrian forces that wanted to leave, Vexthal said. Detailed intelligence about Imperial military movements that humans had somehow acquired. Technical specifications for improved versions of our own equipment. He began pacing again. The most unsettling message came from someone who identified herself only as Phoenix. She sent a complete analysis of Imperial battle doctrine, explaining exactly how human forces plan to counter every standard Zephyrian tactic. Did you ever identify this Phoenix? Not until much later, Vexthal said. Phoenix was Helen Clark, a former administrator who had been presumed dead for 2 years. She had been coordinating resistance activities across multiple star systems while we searched for her body. He stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. Clark's final message to Imperial forces was the most frightening document I have ever read. She explained that human resistance was not desperate or random. Every attack, every sabotage operation, every psychological warfare campaign was part of a carefully planned strategy. What was the strategy? To make occupation so costly that the Empire would choose to withdraw rather than continue fighting, Vexthel said. Clark had calculated exactly how many casualties we could accept before our military leadership would decide the war was not worth the cost. He sat down and stared at the recording device. Her calculations were perfect. She predicted Imperial behavior better than our own strategists understood it. How did the resistance networks coordinate such complex operations? That was what broke our spirit completely, Vexthel said. We realized that every human civilian was a potential intelligence gatherer, every human worker was a potential saboteur, and every human prisoner was a potential source of information for the resistance. You could not trust anyone? Worse than that, Vexthel said. We discovered that humans had been deliberately allowing us to win certain battles so they could study our tactics and technology. The entire occupation was an extended intelligence-gathering operation from their perspective. He looked directly at Killanara. While we thought we were conquering human worlds, the humans were learning everything they needed to know to defeat us. And when they were ready, all of the resistance networks activated simultaneously in a coordinated uprising that we could not stop. What happened during this uprising? Every occupied world rebelled at the same moment, Vexthel said. Supply lines were cut, communication networks were destroyed, command centers were captured or neutralized. In less than 48 hours, Imperial control collapsed across 4 star systems. Vexthel remained standing in the corner for several minutes, his back turned to Killanara. When he finally spoke again, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear him. The coordinated uprising was just the beginning, he said. While we were trying to regain control of the occupied worlds, the humans launched their counterattack. He turned around slowly, and Killanara could see that his eyes had a distant, haunted expression. The human fleet that attacked us was unlike anything our intelligence had predicted. These were not the primitive ships we had fought at Jupiter. These were vessels that combined human engineering with captured Zephyrian technology. How had they developed such advanced ships so quickly? They had been building them for years, Vexthel said. While we thought we were winning the war, human engineers were studying every piece of our technology they could capture. Every destroyed Zephyrian ship became a source of information for their shipbuilders. He walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. The human commander was Admiral Jack Harrison. He commanded a ship called the UES Retribution. According to our sensors, it was larger than our biggest dreadnought, but somehow more maneuverable than our fastest cruiser. How was that possible? Human engineers had redesigned our propulsion systems, Vexthel said. They removed safety features that we considered essential and added modifications that increased performance by 40%. The result was ships that could move in ways that seemed to violate the laws of physics. He looked at his mechanical hand. Harrison's fleet included captains like Steve Mitchell and Grace Adams. These commanders flew their ships in formations that confused our targeting computers while delivering attacks with impossible precision. What made their attacks so effective? They knew exactly where to hit us, Vexthel said. Every weakness in our ship designs, every vulnerability in our defensive systems, every blind spot in our sensor arrays. The humans had studied us so thoroughly that they understood our technology better than we did. He began describing the final battle above Earth's orbit. The Zephyrian fleet had assembled every available warship for what High Command believed would be the decisive engagement. Over 300 Imperial vessels faced Harrison's force of fewer than 100 human ships. The battle should have been a simple victory for us, Vexthel said. We had overwhelming numerical superiority and more experienced crews. But within the first hour, we lost 12 ships while the humans lost only 2. How did the humans achieve such a victory ratio? Coordination, Vexthel said. Harrison's fleet moved like a single organism. Each ship knew exactly what every other ship was doing at all times. When one human vessel engaged a target, 3 others would move to support it from different angles. He stood up and began pacing again. Our ships fought as individuals, even when operating in formation. Human ships fought as a collective intelligence. They shared targeting data, coordinated defensive maneuvers, and adapted their tactics in real time based on battlefield conditions. Did you realize you were losing the battle? Not at first, Vexthel said. Our commanders kept expecting the humans to make mistakes or run out of ammunition. We did not understand that they had been planning this engagement for months. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Killanara. The most shocking moment came when we discovered that Harrison had been deliberately allowing us to win smaller battles throughout the war. Every Zephyrian victory had been carefully calculated to give humans the information they needed for this final confrontation. They had been manipulating the entire war? From the very beginning, Vexthel said. Morrison's first attack near Jupiter was not an attempt to stop our invasion. It was an intelligence-gathering mission. The siege of New Geneva was not a desperate defense. It was a way to study our ground tactics while preparing resistance networks. He sat back down and stared at the table. Even our occupation of human worlds had been part of their strategy. They let us capture territory so they could learn how we organized our forces, how we supplied our troops, and how we responded to different types of resistance. How did you discover this? Harrison told us, Vexthel said quietly. During the battle, he broadcast a message to all Imperial forces. He explained that humans had been fighting a different war than we realized. While we tried to conquer their territory, they had been conquering our knowledge. He rubbed his face with his good hand. Harrison said that humans had never intended to prevent our invasion. Instead, they had planned to make the occupation so costly that we would choose to leave voluntarily. What was your personal breaking point? Vexthel was quiet for a long moment before answering. My ship was badly damaged during the final assault. 3 of our 4 engines were destroyed. Our weapon systems were offline, our life support was failing. He looked at his mechanical hand. I gave the order to abandon ship. My crew escaped in life pods while I remained on the bridge to coordinate the evacuation. I expected to die when the ship's reactor overloaded. But you survived? Harrison's ship moved to intercept my life pod, Vexthel said. I thought they were going to destroy me or take me prisoner. Instead, they offered medical assistance and safe passage to Zephyrian territory. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rehabilitation center's gardens where other veterans moved slowly along the paths. Harrison himself spoke to me over the communication channel, Vexthel continued. He said that humans had no desire to continue fighting once we stopped trying to conquer them. He offered to provide medical care for wounded Zephyrian personnel and escort our remaining forces safely out of human space. How did you respond? I was too shocked to respond, Vexthel said. This was completely outside my understanding of how wars end. The victorious side does not offer aid to their defeated enemies. They demand surrender and impose terms. He turned back to face Killanara, but Harrison was not demanding anything. He simply wanted us to leave human territory and not return. In exchange, he would ensure that all Zephyrian survivors received proper medical treatment and safe transport home. Did you accept his offer? I had no choice, Vexthel said. My remaining forces were scattered and demoralized. Our supply lines were cut, our communication networks were destroyed. We could not continue fighting even if we wanted to. He sat back down and looked at the recording device. Harrison's final words to me were the most disturbing thing I heard during the entire war. He said, "We hope you find peace among the stars." Why did that disturb you? Because he meant it, Vexthel said. There was no anger in his voice, no hatred, no desire for revenge. Harrison genuinely hoped that we would be able to live peacefully after the war ended. He gestured to his mechanical arm. This prosthetic was made using human medical technology. After the war ended, humans began sending humanitarian aid to damaged Zephyrian worlds. They offered to share their advanced medical knowledge with our doctors. How did the Zephyrian Empire respond to these offers? High Command was suspicious at first, Vexthel said. They thought the humans were planning some kind of trap, but the aid kept coming with no strings attached. Medical supplies, food shipments, Technical assistance for rebuilding damaged infrastructure. He looked out the window again. 3 other major galactic powers have abandoned their expansion plans after studying reports from the Human War, the Korthek Dominion, the Veltar Consortium, and the Hive Collectives have all declared human space to be off-limits to their fleets. Are humans considered a threat to galactic peace? The opposite, Vexthal said. Humans are considered the galaxy's most effective peacekeepers. No species wants to risk fighting an enemy that can turn their own conquest into a learning experience. He stood up and walked around the room one final time. The strangest part is that humans seem genuinely uninterested in expanding beyond their solar system. They have the technology and knowledge to conquer other worlds, but they appear content to stay in their small corner of the galaxy. Why do you think that is? Because they already won the only war that mattered to them, Vexthal said. They proved that their way of life could not be destroyed by outside forces. That was all they wanted. He sat back down and stared at his hands. I have been receiving treatment at this rehabilitation center for 2 years. The therapy programs were designed by human psychologists who studied the records of Zephyrian War veterans. They understand our trauma better than our own medical experts. How do you feel about that? Grateful, Vexthal said quietly, and confused. I spent 3 years fighting humans, and now they are helping me recover from the damage that fighting caused. He looked directly at the journalist. I still do not understand how humans think. Their military strategies make no logical sense according to everything we know about warfare. Their willingness to help former enemies violates every principle of political science, but you are grateful for their help. Yes, Vexthal said, because I am alive and my former enemies are the reason why. He gestured to his mechanical hand again. This prosthetic works better than my original limb. Human engineers designed it specifically for Zephyrian physiology. They studied our anatomy and created something that was perfectly adapted to our needs. What is your final assessment of humanity?